G'day, welcome to Market Sound After Work. Today, I don't know if you can hear it, but it's raining outside, so it's something where we're not doing a shooting video this week. And I decided of content I could bring forward to you, a question that I'm asked periodically and I've sort of balked a little bit about because, we'll explain that in a minute, but that's actually about offhand rifle shooting form and how to do that. Now, all more to the point, how I do that. And I suppose there's a fair few details with it, but the reason I balked from it is it's not something I was ever trained, it's not something I've ever trained, it's not something that I have ever thought too much about, in a truth. Well, not in my the brain that's attached to the mouth, the thinking of how to explain it. It's really not something I've done. I've always found this a very natural thing to do. And I suppose in thinking about it, I'll try and go through and break down what it is that I do in the way of offhand rifle shooting. And I'll explain there's a fair bit to do with the brain as well, in the way of what you see of some of the stuff I've done. I, for many years, have been very amazed with some of the shots I can pull off, which I suppose it's still in that place. It surprises me, it surprises Sam. We really do very few shots and I'm on steel at ridiculous distances, hold down very small groups, and it always surprises me. I go out to it and if I think about what I'm about to do, it's a case of how's that possible? And we get into it and then we get close and then we hit the steel and then okay, it's done and we've got over it and that's done and it was all easy. But that doesn't really make sense. In a pragmatic sense, I have some questions as to why it's, you can't just call it lucky when it happens dozens of times. There's something else involved. So let's stop trying to explain that. That's too hard for me to explain. I'll explain what I do in the way of offhand rifle shooting form. Start off with this one here is my 45-70 in the Marlin in the 1895, this one. It's what I've done most with, although I've used all sorts of rifles. This is one that's done the lion's share of the shooting, this sort of stuff. And it's probably of the lever actions, that sort of stuff. Listen, I don't pick favourites, but if I was going to, this would have to be up there. Done a lot of shooting with it. Okay, so, but to start off with, whenever I'm doing offhand shooting, the first thing I'd actually do is, in a real sense, is pick up a rifle and feel the balance, find out where it feels, find out just without, obviously with no ammunition in it. If this is nice and empty, we'll put that hammer down and keep your finger off the trigger, all the stuff in the safety side of things. Don't point the muzzle anywhere you shouldn't do, that sort of stuff. But get a good idea as a feel for where the balance of the rifle is what I'm always doing. I'm also, in the same sense of doing that, is getting a grip where I can feel what's going on with the rifle. So ultimately, when I am offhand shooting, I'm going to find a place where my forward hand is going to grip, is going to have the rifle balanced largely so I've got more of the front than the rear, because I'm going to be pushing it up to my shoulder and the back side of things. But otherwise, where I've got a pretty decent balance and control of it. I'm not going too far forward, extending things out. As much as you might sort of have more control over the end of the muzzle or something like that, if you had a longer wood stock, that type of thing. It's really about strength. It's really about how much strength you've got here. It's not to the extreme side of things, which sometimes you do 22s where you tuck it back in, stick your chest out, your belly out, and tick back over here to try and do this stuff with precision holding like that. That's not something for at least long range offhand shooting I've ever found as an advantage. It really is out there where you're using the muscles of your arm. But the bigger deal, what the forward arm is doing is actually pulling it into your shoulder. So a nice balanced place to do that side of things. The grip down the back here, largely, I suppose there's a couple of things I'd say of what I do. It depends on the rifle and how I shoot it. Well, listen, before I go into this hand here, this is finding a grip and holding it and feeling comfortable, that sort of stuff. Before I go into the rest of the grip side of things, because we're moving into shooting, is my stance. Now, I'll really show that on video so you can see how I stand, but it is really always going to be because I'm a right-hand shooter, it's by my right-hand shoulder, my right leg is back. It'll tend to be at approximately 90 degrees to the shot, sometimes a little less. It's around there, 90 degrees to the shot. My left leg, which is my off side, is forward. And I have a little bit of that sort of stance where it's basically a very good gripping stance where to a large degree my heels are pointing together at an intersection which would probably be around the 700, 800 mil behind my body. So the real thing, and I suppose that's how I stand, the real thing what I'm doing is I'm getting a really sturdy moving grip to the ground. I also make sure one of the important details for shooting precision in long range is that I feel balanced in that stand. If obviously a concrete floor, it's all flat, then it doesn't matter at all. You've got nice, smooth, flat grass, it doesn't matter at all. Or dirt, doesn't matter at all. I tend to be standing where there's rocks and things and there's unevenness, and I will kick it around and move it around to where I feel like I've got a nice, stable grip on the ground, and that's where I'm going to keep my feet. Keeping my feet in that place means it keeps my balance to the same place, and then the form and everything else works. So that's how I do my feet. I wouldn't say that's the only way to do things, is how it works for me, but there's a lot of critical thinking involved with that stance. My back foot position really does have a full balance of being able to control when my body moves, which is I want my body to move. That's what parts of lets the rifle operate properly in the way of that movement. There's going to be a little bit of shoulder movement, but largely my hips and everything are lined up with my legs and my body and that sort of stuff. So the whole lot is going to work together without fighting anything. It is about finding strength while also being relaxed. And I largely, if I watch myself, my legs aren't, I don't stand with stiff knees, I don't stand straight up. I do have my legs in a sort of a natural form. If you look at the images here, you'll see there's sort of a natural stance. It's not with my knees back. It's really with a fairly relaxed stance, about straight leg to a degree, but there's a bit of bend in there to give you that same movement and flex. Everything else, like I said, hips, to the largest degree really, my shoulders are largely straight up and down. Everything is straight in that form with the rifle coming across the front of me. So that's in a form there. The next bit, and this is, I suppose, before I get into this grip, the next bit is where I position the butt pad on my body, actually for my sort of shooting, for ELR shooting, has everything to do with the sight position and my eye position to the sight. And you would think, yes, that there should be a right place to do this sort of stuff. In all my other forms of shooting, then getting that butt pad to the right place so you don't have muzzle rise, all that sort of stuff is one of the most important things. With offhand shooting, and really it comes down to the most important thing in that process is my neck and my head and getting my eye behind the sight. So we're shooting this rifle at 100 yards to 200 yards, then it really is a normal sort of shoulder. It's going into the shoulder. It's not my collarbone or anything like that. It's into, actually my shoulder muscle is where I tend to be, at the top of my shoulder muscle. It's not the shoulder pocket in here, it's the shoulder muscle is where I'm putting this up to. And it's really a place where I can get my eye behind there. Of course, that's only the short range stuff. What I'm always doing is this stuff. And this is where I find my most accuracy. And there's other things involved with that, but where I have a ladder sight and then I'm doing this sort of thing. Or even to the level with this rifle here, at over a mile, I've shot like that. So that's my shooting position. Now, as you can see, I have no cheek weld. This is our low on my shoulder muscle, so the shoulder bone, shoulder muscle type of thing. So really what I'm saying is this shoulder thing, I'm just finding a place where, and my stance, I do this naturally, this left hand, the right hand helps me grip it all up. But when I actually go to shoot, this left hand has got a firm grip, it's got the rifle straight, and it's pulling it back into my shoulder. That's where the strength is. This one here might be holding reasonably firmly, but part of what I've learned in the way of precision offhand shooting is to separate up this hand a little bit. These three fingers and this thumb, that part of my hand is able to grip fairly firmly, and obviously when you're starting to fire things that really pound you, that helps. Sometimes you can not have too firm a grip, but that's firm. But the top half of my hand is, I wouldn't call it relaxed, but it's pretty close to it. it's still going to be, once again, this is empty, but it's still going to be a really almost can't see. We'll go to my stance of my ELR shot. It's going to be, when your trigger pull has to be, if you're watching my finger, you wouldn't see it move. It has to be a squeeze. It is probably the most important part. And that's probably what I can tell you in the fashion of, well, there's not much more to it. That's what the process of the offhand shooting of what I do all the time, and that includes the sharps with the tang sights, and then it's all about this eye position. It's the same sort of thing. That's largely in the sharps rifle. You see, we're using the front rest, but I'm not laying it on the front rest. I'm holding it with my left hand to actually, with the same sort of things going on. Because it's resting, there's a little less pressure I'm trying to involve there, and it's a heavy rifle, blah, blah, blah. But that same thing, this front hand really is very much about controlling your camera, your safe, but it's very much about controlling the rifle in this fashion. So that's its job. It's pulling back into the shoulder, and it's controlling this, making sure everything's straight. So that's important. This one here, there's a grip on the thing. It's reasonably firm, so there's strength involved. But this trigger finger, this squeeze is super, super important. So the next thing, I'll put the rifle down, stop pointing around the place. The next thing I would say, which is the other ingredients about doing this sort of thing, holding onto target, getting your crosshairs or getting your sight onto target. I tend to find naturally to able to be hold fairly still on target and pull the trigger. My little buddy, Sam, she tends to be sort of moving around, and she pulls the trigger as she crosses the target. She's very accurate at shooting in the normal sort of the 25 yards, 50 yards, that sort of stuff. There's not a lot of difference. We shoot the same sort of accuracy. So I wouldn't say there's a right or wrong way and that sort of stuff. I tend to find it fairly easy to hold still on target, but I think some people, well, let me explain what holding still on target means to me. Holding still on target to me means probably somewhere in the vicinity of half a second, maybe quarter of a second sometimes, maybe a second and a half sometimes. But I will tend to deliberately be moving my sights around so I can find my target, so that then I can move it around. So a lot of the time I'm trying to see it. It's a very, very small dot in ELR, and I'm trying to find it, and then I'm trying to hold my correction. So there's a little bit of Kentucky windage going on, sometimes a lot, but most times a little bit. And I'll tend to be trying to find it. So there it is, yeah, there it is, yeah, there it is. And then I'll stop, pull the trigger. So if you're looking at it, you might look at a muzzle that's moving around, but what's actually happening is I'm getting to that place, and then I can stop, hold that position, squeeze the trigger. Like I said, my little buddy, Sam, well, she is crossing as she does the same sort of thing. So there's no stop of the muzzle, but still very accurate in the right places. So that's the hold still. That's how I do. As to there's people who'll be falling across target or raising up on the target and all that sort of stuff, I think that's really a personal thing. For me, the able to hold, and I suppose we'll go into a little bit, yes, Kentucky windages can be a massive thing. Some people say, you know, how can you see your target at 1 mile or at 2,000 yards or whatever distance that we're shooting, or 1,000 yards or 1,000 meters or whatever it is? How can you see the square target? Our 24-inch square plate, white and all that sort of stuff, with the sun behind us onto target and the source, that's very, very easy to see. You can actually see that target with your naked eye in the right conditions right out at 3.5 miles. Been there, tested that, yes, you can see it. The moment the sun's up and you've got a different angle of the sun, it's not reflecting off there, then it becomes hard to see. And in the middle of the day, the white target is impossible to see. We've set them up in years gone by. We've been in the afternoon where the sun's over it or just behind it, set the target up there, and you just can't see it. You can't see it even with binoculars. In the morning, bright light, bright, easy to see light. The moment the sun's on it, it's in the right place, you can see it real easily. So that's easy. The trick is when you're looking through iron sights, it all of a sudden becomes not easy. It takes away sometimes 3/4 of your vision, very hard to see. So a lot of the times You move the muzzle out of the road to find the target. There's the target, bring it across, there, then you shoot. So that becomes harder. Sometimes with the windage that you're required, because there's too much wind, or you need a bit more elevation or whatever it is, then you go to proper Kentucky windage. And that simple process, I've explained that before, but if I know the target's here, I have a spotter, she is telling me exactly where things are hitting. So that means that then I can go above target or to the side target or below target or wherever it is. I can go to a different spot which allows no windage that I can see easier. So that might be a tree, which is 5 times as big as the target. And then I know that I go to the corner of this tree. Right there is where it's close to the target and it needs to be a little bit higher. So the corner and a little bit up, that's where I go. So all of a sudden what I'm looking at actually is a lot easier to see than the target. And everyone could see that a lot easier than the target. But I've got a spotter who's looking at the target, and then I make my extrapolation, my calculations out of where I was aiming to where Sam said it hit to where I've got to aim to make that adjustment. Everything's got to be straight. Everything's got to work properly, but that's Kentucky windage. That also means that yes, you can have a straight shoot straight through the side here. If you've got enough of a hill behind, then you can be aiming at the top of the hill when the target's at the bottom of the hill type thing and pull it off that way for an ELR shot as well. So listen, that's the physical side of it and the optical side of it. All fairly straightforward. There is another bit to go with this stuff that I'd have to say I find a little bit hard to explain. The hard bit is the brain thing. And I haven't got a, well, I suppose I'll try and explain as best I can. Certainly, as I started with, there is things about some of the CLR offhand shooting, which I've certainly been there and done. Me and Sam have been down there and done, which are a little flabbergasting to us as well. It happens just as easy as you see. It really does. But on heading out there, I think this, I try not to overthink it, because this should be a lot harder than that. This shouldn't be sort of possible with what I think everything is. But it happens easily, and it happens consistently easily. So what I've been through the bits and pieces of the form, all that sort of stuff. There's nothing special there beyond, yeah, it is what it is. The bit I suppose I'd go through and try and explain the brain thing of what I've learned about my brain so far, and I think this is a key to this process. I have a moderately logical, pragmatic, critical thinking brain. It's how I do things. I use that in the form of my building rifles and setting up rifles and that type of things, what you see when scopes and bag bases and bipod systems and all that sort of stuff. That's all about the critical thinking, the pragmatic way of looking at how the engineering of how a rifle works, and then do the right thing with the form, that sort of stuff. That sort of makes sense. But there's some other things I can tell you about my brain also, is that it has different speeds. I know from whether it's driving cars or motorbikes way too fast, that there is a different level. Things start to slow down. When I start to push a lot harder, then things seem to slow down. I know that from the first time I experienced was the reverse, where I've been pushing something a lot very quickly, riding very quickly, an extreme situation. And when I got off that bike at that place and then tried to actually interact with the humans that were in the place where I'd stopped, for a while, it took me a while to come down. My brain just couldn't do that. It was all just discombobulated, and it took me a while to come back down. And I realized that my brain goes to a different place, which is, then I started to pay attention to sometimes when I push really hard. So that was sometimes with driving cars, and sometimes with crisis mode, where things going crazy, that my brain goes to a different gear. Sometimes that means I push people too hard. Sometimes it means that I'm just running faster with things. I'm sort of better at managing that sort of stuff now, but I know there's that side of my brain. There's other sides of the brain. If I've got too much, then I stop sleeping because I need to be working, and I can function like that for a while. That's part of how my brain does as well. Don't know what that is. I can't explain more about that, but I do know these features there. The other side of my brain is, I'm not one for showing off, and I'm not one for competitions. I have literally no drive to beat someone else. That's not something that I'm driven to. to my detriment, to the fact of I will actually start to trip myself up through the fact I have no urge to do that. Showing off, another thing that I learned as a young man, that wasn't a good thing to do because I'd stuff it up. Largely I don't want to. There's a whole heap of I don't want to. Sometimes as a young man, you've probably all been there, felt like you should do because of the right thing to do or people wanted you to, and some people are good at that. I wasn't. I was never good at the showing off side of things. Brain just doesn't focus on it. But here's the thing, with the ELR shooting, with the offhand ELR shooting, but with all the ELR shooting, you're looking at a boy and his girl out in the paddock doing what they want to do. My little spotter, Sam, the some would say best half of the team, she is really inspired to get this job done. It's really, really important to her to see the first splash of dirt so she can help me get onto target. It's really, really important to her if we can get onto target, but her doing her job is super important to her. It makes her day better. It makes her life better. And for the same reason, in the same logic, it really helps, it really is important to me that I get my job done for us, but for her. That she's putting all this effort in and I give her the reward of that side of things. This is the challenge that a boy and a girl, a man and his wife, two mates, whatever you want to call it, really take on. So that's something that does have me wired to do things that way. So I'm certain that that's part of it. That is what you're actually looking at. That other gear that I've got, that other thing that happens in my brain, I'm engaging it in some form or other in the same fashion. That's the only thing I can make sense of what actually lets stuff that shouldn't happen. And I've seen it at ridiculous levels. If you want to look at our channel, there is in heavy wind a little close group and then a hit at 24-inch steel. That wasn't offhand, but that was a Muzzle and Nagant iron sights, 6.5, 55, 2,400 yards. It really happened as you saw it really happen. There isn't any fudges of that sort of stuff. This thing has been on steel at 1,000 yards half a dozen times. It's sort of almost got the target down at the 1,900 yards. You've obviously recently seen all the different ones from the 375 to the 44 to the 30-30, all that sort of stuff, how that stuff really happens. And that is that same thing, that working out all the technical side of it. Sometimes that's holdover or Kentucky windage or what you call it. Sometimes it's on there with the right sights and that sort of stuff. But there's still this ridiculously small group that ends up that I, in a pragmatic sense, say, well, how can you possibly do that? Well, that's all I got for you. That's the form, that's the sighting, and that's trying to explain the brain. So yes, ultimately I suppose it encompasses all our long range shooting, by the way. The stuff that we sometimes struggle as well, but the stuff that makes it easier is actually a boy and a girl, a pair of mates out doing things that really, really matters to us. It's really important. We want to build the content and that sort of stuff, but out there with nothing but the wildlife, the wind, and the target and our equipment, we get the job done that really matters to us. So anyway, I'll stop going on about that. Listen, I hope that's something for some people. I can't explain it any more than that. I'm sure that the people who train this are going to say, listen, there's things you should be doing differently. This is what I do. It works for me. There's some fundamentals that I think that really make a lot of sense with it. But beyond that, it's what we do. Anyway, guys, thank you very much for checking in. I hope you liked, and we'll catch you next time.